Welcome to Family Office Secrets. I'm Tim McNeely, and I am excited to be here today with Dr. Trevor Kimball. And by the end of our conversation today, you're going to know why being in private practice is still the best way for you as a dentist to create financial independence. You're going to have some insights into the current marketplace and some tools to help you decide if ownership is for you. And more importantly, you're going to feel confident moving forward no matter how you choose to practice. And we have such a fantastic guest today. We've got Dr. Trevor Kimball. And according to the American Dental Association, there's about 577 dentists in California who are going to sell or walk away from their practice every single year. And behind every one of those transitions is a story. Some of those stories are going to end well and some not so well. Some will just end. Each one of those dentists will close one chapter of their story and start writing their next. And you too, you have a story, your practice, your life, your family, your friends, and even the people that matter most. They are all part of that story. And the actions you're taking today, they're going to help lead up to your next chapter. Now, I know what you're thinking. So what and who cares? What does story have to do with anything with practicing dentistry? Well, the truth is many doctors today miss the opportunity to transition on their own terms. They miss the opportunity to write their own story. Instead, your story gets written by factors that you didn't anticipate or circumstances that are now too late to do anything about. And you can leave money on the table and in many cases end your career on a sour note. I don't want that to happen to you today. And that's why Dr. Trevor Kimball is here today. He's going to talk about how to really take control of your future. And Trevor is a doctor, but of a different sort. He has his PhD in the philosophy of religion and wrote his dissertation on how story shapes our lives to give them meaning. Trevor is also president of Integrity Practice Sales, and he's helped over 400 dentists take control of their ownership story. And over the next couple of minutes, you're going to learn what steps you can take today to write your best chapter yet. Trevor, welcome.
Thanks, Tim. How's it going?
It's going fantastic and so excited to have you here today. And tell me a little bit about your background. What do you enjoy about what you do?
So you just mentioned that I am the president of Integrity Practice Sales, and that's kind of the relevant reason that we're chatting right now. I love helping doctors exit successfully on their own terms, and I love helping buyers move into private practice, which I know is the best way for doctors to achieve financial independence as dentists.
Now, right, private practice, financial independence, isn't private practice, I mean, that's a lot of headache. Is that still really a good, viable way to move forward with the growth of all these dental service organizations? Why is private practice still an attractive option?
So a few months ago, I just ran some pretty straightforward numbers, and very conservatively, over a 30-year period, the doctors in private practice are taking home $7 million in additional take home over a 30-year period. $7 million, 30-year period. And that's not accounting for any practice growth over that 30-year period and not accounting for investing that money over any length of time. So if you start plugging in those sorts of numbers, the tax savings, the growth, investment growth on that money, and the equity you build in your practice, we're looking at a $7 million difference.
That's not an insignificant number, is it?
I don't think so.
That helps pay for a couple student loans, doesn't it?
A couple student loans, a couple college tuitions, a couple homes, however you want to, put that money to use.
Wow.
It's available for doctors in private practice. These are conservative numbers. I've seen other people say it's 14. I thought their figures were a bit aggressive, but I can say with some confidence that a fairly conservative number is 7 million.
So talk to us a little bit about those numbers. How did you kind of come up with them? Right, I don't need the real in-depth math, but just kind of an overview. What were some of the things you were looking at?
Yeah, so I was looking at a doctor who's producing a $800,000 and working as an associate, receiving 25% compensation. Their take home then would be $200,000 a year. Not a bad number at all. Everybody's proud, but those years in dental school could be worth a lot more. If you were an owner producing 800,000 and you have an average overhead of about 60%, that means your take home is 320,000 a year. Which means that you are still receiving the 25% for the work you do as if you were an associate, but you're also receiving the 15% profit generated by the business. And then let's assume that 25% of your practice production comes from your hygiene department. So if you're producing 800 and your hygiene department is producing 266,000, that's a grand total of 1,066,000. If your overhead is still 60% and you're still producing the same amount of dentistry, your take-home income is now 426,400.
Hmm.
So that's more than twice the associate income of 200.
Right. And then multiplied over a lifetime of practice, that certainly adds up, doesn't it?
It adds up, and especially if you consider the tax savings that are available to small business owners and some of the other advantages of owning your own small business, those numbers just start compounding.
Wow. Now, right, what are some things that, a newer doctor, right, aside from the financial independence and really creating a better path forward for that, what are some clues or things that people can analyze when they're thinking about, well, should I own a practice? Is this really for me?
Yeah. So obviously, owning a practice might not be for everyone. Just like everyone that goes into dentistry doesn't do it because it's a great career path in terms of making money. It's also a great career path because it offers you a very flexible schedule. If you want to um, earn a healthy living working 2 days a week, you can do that as a dentist. If you want to specialize and go from practice to practice, you can do that as a dentist. If you want to show up and make money um, and work as an associate, you can absolutely do that. If you want to make the big money, you want to go into private practice. If you want to have control over your schedule, you want to go into private practice. If you want to have autonomy with regards to your treatment plans, you want to go into private practice. So those are some of the reasons why dentists might consider going into private practice.
Okay. Now, I think a lot of times people will consider, being an associate because they like the idea of showing up at work and finishing the day and going home and not having to worry about keeping the lights on or the other parts of business ownership. Is that something someone should be concerned about in kind of trying to figure out if private practice is the right fit or not?
Absolutely. And I think there's nothing wrong with being an associate. I mean, it's certainly not like a moral thing. Um, I know lots of dentists who practice as associates and are very happy. I've also, I don't know when this is going to come out, but we're right in the middle of a COVID lockdown, hence the beautiful library behind me. I'm in my kitchen instead of the office today because we're sheltering in place. But I've talked to a number of associates over the last few weeks who were very unhappy with the way that their corporate office
Hmm.
treated the shutdown, their definition of what constituted an emergency, um, the way that they were being asked to practice, they weren't happy with it. And they've called me up and said, "Hey, Trevor, I'm looking for a practice. My timeline has been bumped up. I've got a little extra time right now, and let's dive in and try and find the right practice."
Hmm.
Um, so, I mean, having a job is fantastic.
Yeah.
Working as an associate is a great way to go. There's nothing wrong with punching a clock, but there are a lot of advantages um, to private practice. And if you've worked as hard as you've worked to become a dentist and accrued the kind of debt that you've probably accrued to become a dentist, um, going into private practice is something that is absolutely worth considering.
Hmm.
I'll also note that my father, who's one of the co-founders of Integrity Practice Sales and has been a pretty successful dental consultant for the last, I don't know, 25 years. He has, and through him, I've seen all sorts of different dentists with very different personality types, dentists who are quiet, introverted, as well as dentists who are extroverted. And I think at the beginning, he's more of an extroverted person. At the beginning of his consulting journey, he thought that good leadership meant being forceful and getting out there and, having this one particular type of personality, and that sort of dentist is going to be really successful, and the other types might not have the sort of leadership qualities. But the truth is that I've seen dentists of all personality types take to the leadership of private practice, the leadership required to be successful in private practice, and be really successful business owners. So I don't think it's not like there's a personality type that is suited for private practice. And if you don't have that personality type, then private practice isn't for you. It's really about asking yourself, what are my long-term financial plans? What are my long-term plans in terms of flexibility, and how do I want to practice dentistry? What kind of control do I want to have in the long term? Dentists in private practice obviously have a lot of control over how they practice dentistry, where they practice dentistry, how often they practice dentistry. Um,
Well, and with that, right, I'm guessing they even have some of the same flexibility in terms of, right, not just over control of when and where and how they want to practice, but they're going to have the flexibility to really build a practice that's a reflection of their vision and values, no one else's.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So if they value it, being home at 5 o'clock with the family, you can build a practice that reflects that, can't you?
absolutely. Yeah. You can, I mean, um, I've seen all sorts of schedules work well. And the point that you're making is exactly right. With private practice, you have flexibility.
Yeah.
No one's telling you when to show up, what um, dentistry to present, or um, how to orient your treatment plans or anything like that. You have more or less full control.
Yeah. So what are some things that go into the value of a practice, right? Let's say I'm starting to look around, I'm one of those associates that just called you up and said, Trevor, I'm fed up. I'm ready to be in control of my financial future, not let someone else dictate my future to me. I want to buy a practice. I've got $1 million to spend it. Is that the right way to go about buying a practice, or what are the things that go into the valuation, and how should we start analyzing these things?
Great questions. The number, well, there's a few things that you definitely want to take into account early on. Um, First and foremost, um, where do you want to live? That's huge. I did say earlier that you have a lot of flexibility about where you want to practice dentistry in private practice. And what I meant by that was the corporate office isn't going to send you to another location. You're going to have control over whether they close the place you're currently working, and then you have to go out and find somewhere else. Once you're set up, and you can set yourself up where you want to be set up. That's one of the benefits. But of course, once you're set up, you're not absolutely locked in, but you're going to want to be planning to stay in the same location for a while. And so thinking about where you want to be, what's a realistic commute? Where do you want to raise your family? Where do you want to spend the next 10, 20, 30 years of your life? These are big questions. And I can understand why they make some people nervous. But committing to this and buying that private practice, yeah, you have to basically take into account where you want to be. So location is huge. But then the second major part is asking yourself, how much money do I want to make? That is one of the major questions with buying a practice. Lots of doctors are afraid of large purchase price numbers because it's a large purchase price. You're taking out a large loan that has all of the sort of I understand that that's scary. But the fact is, the purchase price is almost always more directly a function of the amount of money being made, the take-home income of the doctor, what we call maybe seller's discretionary earnings, which is not just their W-2 income, but the profit of the business, any money that they're running through the business, All of these get rolled up into what we call the seller's discretionary earnings. And that's the number that is most directly related to the purchase price of almost any practice. So if you're buying a practice for 800,000, you should expect it to be, you should expect your take-home income before debt service to be somewhere in the 350 to 450 range. If you're buying a practice for 2 million, you should be expecting your net income, your take-home income, to be in the, I don't know, 800 to a million two range yearly take-home income for the buyer. And that's, you're walking into a machine that's generating this. You obviously have to step in and do some dentistry, but the infrastructure around you is created. People on the team, and the patients, the ball keeps rolling.
Hmm.
And so you're stepping into a machine that's already up and running. And so in almost every case, as long as you have a decent credit score, and you don't have crazy expenses, the lenders are going to be very willing to give you quite a large loan. And within reason, it's usually easier, for most doctors to buy the larger practice and have the larger take-home income. It gives you more cushion with regards to your expenses, more cushion with regards to the practice loan, and quite often they are the better run machines
Hmm.
that are out there. So, I mean, asking yourself how much you want to make is one of the most important questions when you're analyzing what sort of practice do I want to buy.
Well, right, that's interesting to hear you talk about that, because I think, maybe sometimes we can find ourselves in a situation where we're considering private practice, and we may be attracted to that smaller practice, smaller ops, thinking, this one has a lot of opportunity, and I'll go in there and I'll build this thing up, and that way it can kind of grow with me, as opposed to, like you mentioned, stepping into an already running business where you just have to show up and do the dentistry. And so, but I'm guessing there's pros to cons to each one of those scenarios. And so, you say, how much money do you want to make? I want to make a couple $1,000,000 a year. So should I just go out and buy a practice that generates that?
Great questions. So obviously, on the one hand, with the larger practices, you don't just show up, perform some dentistry, go home, and call it a day. You are going to have to exercise some leadership, some management skills. Um, Ideally, that's maybe 10%, 5% of your job, in terms of where you allocate your time. But you're not just stepping into something that's going to run absolutely without you. So it does take some skill there. On the other hand, the smaller practices can be great for a doctor who wants to grow this practice. If you feel very confident in your entrepreneurial skill set, if you think you know what it takes to drive organizational change and build this practice up, then these smaller practices can be amazing values, and offer tremendous opportunities. Sometimes the practices that have lower price points are lower because the doctor is working only 2 days a week or 1.5 days a week. And yes, you're going to have to build up your patient base and some of these other things. But if you start just opening more, working more than the seller, you're probably going to drive additional revenue into the practice. I mean, that can be a huge potential upside in one of these smaller practices. So obviously, yes, there is, it's not the same thing. My message here really, is don't be afraid of a slightly larger practice just because it has a large price associated with it, because what you're walking into will justify that larger price. And the banks will back me up on this 100%.
Well, right, and I think it was interesting how you talked about the larger practices can actually provide more cushion sometimes, right? I'm guessing across the board, right? The margins are fairly similar in terms of the practice, the take home income, right? All things being equal, the percentages are pretty close. But what you have to remember is you get to a larger number. Now those percentages may be the same, but they're of a bigger number. So by default, you've got a bigger cushion and you've got more wiggle room in things, just in terms of your cash flow that would be coming in. So I think that's great advice, Trevor. We've talked about some of the important things for the buyer to think about, but you also work with people who are getting ready to transition out of their practice, who have built their career in private practice. What are some things that the seller should be thinking through?
So as a success fee firm that works with buyers and sellers, at the end of the day, we exclusively represent sellers. So working with sellers is the number one thing that we do on a day-to-day basis. So if you've been in private practice for a long time, you're considering a sale in the next 5 years, there are certainly a handful of things you're going to want to do. I'll just rattle off a few and then we can kind of discuss them in a little bit more detail. Don't hire an associate to buy your practice. That's not to say associates are always bad. What I'm saying is that it's a bad transition strategy. Don't hire an associate with the goal, and especially the only goal of them then being the one to purchase your practice. Another great point is to stay focused and don't slow down. When buyers and banks see revenue numbers that are declining year after year after year, they get cold feet. They get nervous. What's wrong with this practice? Is something wrong? Well, 90% of the time, there's not anything wrong with the practice per se. It's just that the seller's getting older. They're more tired. They don't want to practice as much. They have some money in the bank. Maybe the kids are through college. Maybe the house is paid off. The drive just isn't there as much anymore. Why wouldn't I want to take an extra week of vacation here, an extra week of vacation there? They're literally just working less. But in almost every case, when the bank sees these numbers and their underwriters, they want to know the story and they get a little nervous, and it's going to potentially make it more challenging to sell your practice. So don't slow down. Making the right upgrades to your practice can have a big effect. Keeping clean books and records. I'm sure, Tim, you can attest to this, but lots of practices have really messy books. If you're going to sell, we're not selling a piece of real estate that an appraiser can come knock on the walls and check the foundation. We're looking at spreadsheets, at numbers, at income statements, balance sheets, tax returns. All of these financial documents tell stories over time, with the possible exception of the balance sheet. But these income statements and everything, you choose a time period, you see money coming in, money going out. The whole thing tells a story. If your books and records aren't clean and up to date, not only is the buyer going to notice that they're messy, but it's going to be really challenging to substantiate them for the buyer, substantiate them for the banks, put the right price on your practice. Hiring a bookkeeper to come in can be an incredibly inexpensive investment. To have these clean books makes a huge difference. And finally, you're going to want to talk to someone like Tim to assess your financial situation and when it makes sense to think about selling your practice in relation to your broad financial goals. In most cases, a practice sale isn't going to fund your retirement, but it can make a significant difference as you approach retirement and retirement planning and thinking about generating the kind of income you want to generate through your retirement. The practice sale can be a big chunk of that.
Yeah. So what are some of the kind of common pitfalls that you see both buyers and sellers making as they're going through this process?
One major pitfall is lack of preparation. All those points I just mentioned, not taking them to heart. Preparation is key. We're happy to help you prepare. We've just launched a new product called our transferability analysis. It complements our valuation and our sort of traditional buyer due diligence work with an analysis about how difficult it will be to transfer your practice. What that means is lots of times you can put a number or put a value on a practice, but if you want that number on paper to actually become dollars in your bank account, there are certain things that can completely derail that. Now, there's some of these things that we can never foresee. We just had a practice the other day. It actually closed about a month ago, and the we had worked out a good deal. The buyer was excited. It was both practice and real estate involved. Everything is moving according to schedule, more or less, and we're proceeding to close. The bank is running all the traditional title searches and everything they need to do with the real property involved. And as they're going through all the documentation, they discover that there was no record that when this location was a gas station in the 70s, that the gas tanks had ever been removed from under the practice.
Oh,
Now that is a potential disaster. Not only would that destroy the sale, but they would probably have to stop practicing completely, do a bunch of construction. I mean, it was a nightmare. The seller was looking at legal action against the people they bought the building from if this didn't pan out. Thankfully, we got some soil testing and the various things, and we were able to close the practice, like I said, just a month and a half ago or so.
wow.
But I mean, wild, just wild. Anyway, all that to say, there are issues that we can't prepare for, but there are absolutely issues that we can prepare for, and issues that I see fairly regularly. About, I mentioned at the beginning of this about associates and not bringing on an associate as a transition strategy. One of the common things I see with relation to these associates who are brought on with the primary thinking of the seller doctor being that I'm going to sell my practice to this young dentist. And then they'll come to us. They want a valuation. They want to have a discussion. We look at the practice. We put a number on it. We say, all right, here you go. And they say, all right, I'm going to sell this to my associate. A year and a half later, we get a call. And the deal's blown up. Why is the deal blown up? Well, the associate came in and they helped the seller grow the practice. They brought in new patients. They breathed fresh life into the place. They got the team excited. Everybody was there. The doctor was able to produce more, or the practice was producing more with 2 doctors. And with this fresh infusion of life, the value of the practice had actually gone up with the addition of the associate. Great, that's wonderful. So when it comes time to sell, the value is set here. But the associate, when they maybe first join the practice, realizes that, well, if I just bought it here, it would be worth here. So the associate feels like everybody, they're being cheated. They grew this practice and now they're paying the price for growing the practice. I mean, how does that seem fair? It's not fair, except for the fact that it's completely fair. They didn't own the practice. It's not their business. At the end of the day, the seller made a great hire who grew the practice for them. That's fantastic. Good for the seller. But on the flip side, the seller doesn't have much leverage. This person grew the practice, but they are also able to move across the street. If you're not an owner, a non-compete in California doesn't hold very much weight. They might be able to take a key team member with them. They might be able to take some patients with them. And the seller knows this. And so by the time that this negotiation starts dragging on, the associate is less motivated, is working less, presenting less dentistry. The seller is unhappy, working less, producing less dentistry. The practice is declining. The associate leaves. And all of a sudden you have this practice where we could have structured a deal with that associate early on. It's now completely blown up. and the doctor is coming back to us and saying, hey, can you sell my practice? That old value you set for us is still good, right? And you're thinking, well, I think we're going to have to take another look at these numbers because the last year wasn't great on your practice.
Hmm. Wow.
That, that's a story that's all too common. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't work sometimes. It absolutely does work sometimes. And you might just have to be a little bit savvy in your negotiation. And with the, um, if you want to sell to your associate, you have a great associate, um, that's great. One of the services that we usually offer in that case is a um, very reduced commission if you sell to the associate. But we do all the work that we would need to do to put the practice on the market immediately so that the associate understands that, hey, there is actually
Mm.
additional interest in this practice. They have first, the first opportunity to be there to purchase the practice. And we can usually negotiate that and make it work with the associate um, if we structure it the right way.
So really, even in a situation like that, it comes back to kind of vision of what does your transition look like? What are you planning for? And really having those conversations up front and making sure you've got a plan in place and not just mentally, but you're actually putting it out there to the world and sharing that vision with others and making sure everyone's aligned. And that can lead to better results than just thinking, hey, I'm going to hire an associate and sell them the practice in a couple years and never really communicating that to anyone. So it sounds like communication is key, and just having a transition strategy in place, no matter what you're trying to do, is really a key differentiator. And probably the pitfall is not having a transition strategy in place.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think you hit
Yeah.
the nail on the head.
Yeah, so working with professionals sometimes can take a little bit of money out of my pocket. And so is it worth working with a trusted resource and with someone like Integrity to buy or sell a practice? Why shouldn't I do it on my own?
There's a lot of reasons not to do it on your own. Um, I talk to dentists fairly regularly. Usually they come up to me at conventions and they're very excited to tell me that they sold their practice. They didn't need a broker at all. And then they give me some of the numbers. And, you know, good for you. And I don't usually like to tell them, you left a lot of money on the table because you didn't have the kind of exposure.
Mm.
You didn't prepare properly. You weren't accustomed to negotiating on the different potential deal points on any of these sales. Um, so obviously leaving money on the table is one potential problem. Um, at the end of the day, having exposure to more buyers, having a carefully managed process, and a plan in place with professionals who have relationships with other professionals like lenders, CPAs, attorneys, um, can make it much more likely that you successfully turn that valuation on paper into money in the bank. And I've seen that happen time and time again.
Well, right, because I think there's really kind of this misconception out there that all right, and I say that jokingly, all you really have to do is find that buyer or find the seller and agree on a price, and it's done. But the reality is, there's a lot more that goes into this, isn't there?
Absolutely. In fact, the way we usually think about it, if somebody comes to us with a buyer already in mind, like their associate, for example, we reduce our commission by 50%. And the thinking there is that the um, identifying the buyer, identifying the right buyer is kind of half the battle. Usually there needs to be more than one buyer at play. And we work with lots of buyers and can bring lots of different buyers to your practice. But if you've identified one and you think they're a great fit and you're excited to sell your practice to them, the other half of that is structuring the deal, is packaging it, is getting that buyer their lending, is negotiating the deal points, and bringing that practice through not just a successful sale, but a successful transition where the doctor steps out, the new doctor steps in, the transition is seamless, they don't lose patients, there's no attrition, and the practice continues running smoothly into the future for another 10, 20, 30 years.
Hmm. Excellent. Well, I'll tell you, Trevor, you have been such a great resource, and I love that study you did at the very beginning, talking about just the additional income that can be created over someone's lifetime simply by being in private practice. What a great resource! What are some other resources that you'd like to share with our audience? Where are some tools, resources? How can they find you?
Yeah, so we've got our website's integritypracticesales.com. And we've created a handful of great resources for doctors at every stage. We have I think it's like a 60-page buyer guide available for free download on our website. It walks you through thinking about um, purchasing a practice, what to do in regards to due diligence. Um, it walks you through the whole process, kind of from a 30,000-foot
Hmm.
view down to really practical tips. Like if you're looking at a schedule during due diligence, you don't want to look forward because schedules are almost always full looking forward. What you really want to know is what the schedule actually looked like in the actual practice. So you want to look backwards for 2 weeks. And that way, if there were cancellations, no shows, that sort of thing, that'll be reflected in the past schedule, what really happened, not looking forward, what the ideal situation would have been.
Okay.
So, from really practical, small things like that, down through, we walk you through the whole process. So, anyway, it's the buyer guide, it's on our website, easily accessible and completely free. So, do check that out. I think it's a great resource for all buyers. For sellers, we also have a 5 steps to prepare for a practice sale document that's available on our website. That walks through some of the things I mentioned today. And then if you are thinking it might be time for me to sell, uh, do have a conversation with one of our agents. Again, our website's integritypracticesales.com. We've got amazing agents who are out there in the field, in the trenches, doing this every day. They are truly professionals serving professionals. And I'm excited to be leading such an awesome team at Integrity Practice Sales. Meet with one of our agents and just have a absolutely confidential, absolutely no obligation conversation. And they can help you come up with a transition plan and identify the best steps for moving forward.
Excellent. Yeah, and you are at most of the, if not all, the different California Dental Society local components.
We're
The
at a lot of the society
Yep.
meetings, and we're at the CDA meetings, not this year, but probably we'll be up in San Francisco. And we would love to have a conversation with any of you. Also, my email is trevor@integritypracticesales.com. It's Trevor at integritypracticesales.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I can certainly put you in touch with a local agent, and do my best to answer any transition questions that come up.
Excellent. Well, hey, Trevor, thank you so much. You have been just such a wealth of knowledge. And I know I certainly feel more confident in recommending private practice ownership now, right? Just those numbers are astronomical. And, the resources of the dental community are so strong. People are so helpful. And whatever you're struggling with, whatever your fears are, you've got someone out there who can help you make your dream of private practice ownership a reality, or your dream of being an associate reality, right? There's no right or wrong. It's about getting clear on your vision and what you want. So, Trevor, thank you for sharing your insights with us today.
Yeah, my
Thank you.
pleasure, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be
Thank you,
here.
everyone, for tuning in. I'm Tim McNeely, and I'm in your corner.